Hello and welcome to our webinar. It brings me great joy today to be introducing this webinar, GenAI Governance Framework. This topic has been in the news. We're hearing it from our customers, from our partners, from everyone who's involved in the AI industry. Is it a hype? We don't know yet. But more importantly is taking into consideration all the framework and all the elements that need to be in place before you implement it into your product. I want to first welcome you to our discussion today. There's plenty of discussion topics to be addressed. But before we jump in, I would like to assess the room and ask them one simple question. We have a survey right now on the screen. Have you or your company started adopting GenAI tech? Now, whoever is watching us right now, all they need to do is scan the QR code on the screen, and they'll be able to answer the question live as we go. Now, I'm going to pause for a few seconds, and then we can come back to this result of the survey. Today's discussion is very quickly, we're going to have an introduction for the speakers for today's topic, and then we're going to assess along with Jason Pikoos and Petr Baudis the GenAI current situation, and then we're going to move on to deep dive into the GenAI framework, followed by a panel discussion, and there will be a Q&A. So if you have a question, feel free to add it from wherever you're watching it, and we will be addressing it at the end. And now, without further ado, allow me to introduce to the stage Jason Pikoos, Managing Partner at Connor Group, and allow him to introduce himself. Hi, Jason.
Hey, Rami. Hey, everybody. Nice to be here today. I'm Jason Pikoos, a Managing Partner at Connor Group. I've been in the finance and accounting and professional services industry for over 20 years. And at Connor Group, I'm responsible for our technology go-to-market, innovation, and as you can imagine, that brings in AI. I help many companies as they're exploring both their automation and their AI journey, and I'm really excited to talk about the topic today because it's a really relevant one, given some of the nuances of this technology. Maybe I can tell people a little bit about Connor Group quickly. There we go. So Connor Group, we're a professional and specialized professional services firm. We kind of think of ourselves as the one-stop shop for the CFO. We have a broad range of services, including accounting advisory, helping with complex accounting issues, digital solutions and technology, financial close and reporting, IPO, M&A, and then transformation and risk services. We have over 1,600 companies, clients on a global basis, and we help many, many companies even as they go through the journey to get listed on the stock exchange. So excited to be here today and excited to share with you guys a little bit more about the GenAI Governance Framework.
Wonderful. Thanks for the introduction, Jason. I'm sure you're going to get a lot of questions down the line. And now allow me to introduce you to our co-founder and CTO, Petr Baudis, who's going to be our speaker today. Hi, Petr.
Hello, everyone.
Petr, do you want to introduce our audience today, who you are, what you've done, all about Rossum, all the cool stuff we've been working on?
Absolutely, and I think for the Rossum we'll come back to that also later down the line. But quickly about myself, so I'm one of the co-founders of Rossum. I'm the CTO of the company, so I'm responsible for our product, for our scientific R&D, and overall that from the product perspective, we reached the milestone of our mission, which is to enable people in company back offices who process business transactions and documents associated with business transactions to process 1 million documents per year in this fashion, or 1 million transactions per year, which means automating most of this back office work and automating how businesses conduct their regular business operations when cooperating with other companies in their relationships.
Tremendous. And about Rossum, for those who don't know yet?
All right, certainly. Essentially, we are almost 8 years old company right now. We are one of the up and coming market leaders in IDP, leading the category in terms of ability to manage this document process end to end, leading the category in terms of AI accuracy and automation rates. So we see ourselves as a technological leader of intelligent document processing, especially in the cloud area. And based on that, we got recognition from top tier senior analysts regarding this. We are a very research and engineering driven company. Over half of the company is in those roles. So we are really a deep tech player. We aren't just repetiting third-party systems. We are doing a lot of AI research, a lot of development to deliver a top-tier product, and we are backed by leading investors in order to deliver that.
Thank you, Peter. We're going to move on to the reason why we're all here, GenAI, current situation, and emerging use cases. I will leave the stage now for our two expert speakers, and I wish you a very enjoyable listen. So, Jason, Peter, take it away.
Thank you, Rami. So I'm going to start off by just giving a little bit of context around generative AI, because I think it helps to understand a bit of that context before we actually get into the detailed discussion of governance. As I run through these, obviously, feel free to pose questions. Peter, if you have anything to add, feel free to jump in. So maybe, Rami, we can jump to the next slide there. Okay. So one of the things that we start with when we talk about generative AI is, I feel like it's really important to understand AI in the context of the technology stack. We already actually have a lot of great technologies. There are dynamic applications, whether you're an Oracle shop or an SAP shop or a NetSuite shop. There's a lot of integration and automation platforms that already exist out there, whether it's Automation Anywhere or Workado. There's a lot of phenomenal, now relatively inexpensive data infrastructure, whether it's a Snowflake shop, whether you're using Tableaus. But the reality is they were also very constrained. These very programmed technologies had a lot of limitations in the ability to deal with documentation in many forms, the ability to deal with degrees of ambiguity, which often is embedded in documentation and unstructured data. And that's where artificial intelligence has really given us a set of new tools and capabilities that, as the visual shows, completes the triangle. And I really do believe that with the existing tools plus AI technologies like Rossum, we really have the ability to automate in ways unimaginable just a few years ago. The other thing on the other end to keep in mind is artificial intelligence is a tool, and it's a very powerful tool. You should, as you look to implement it in the context of the other technologies. So a fantastic tool, really expands the capabilities of our existing tech stack. Rami, maybe next slide, please. What is generative AI? This is a very simple definition. There's probably a few different ways you can define it. I'm actually going to read it because I think it's a decent definition. It refers to a type of artificial intelligence, and there are several forms of artificial intelligence that can create new content or data, such as text or images, learning from patterns from existing data. It uses powerful algorithms, language models, visual models to generate outputs that mimic human-like creativity and problem solving. That's what makes it so amazing. Where in the past, there's many technologies where there's just basic OCR technologies or other program technologies. You had to figure out exactly how everything would work. Here you have something which acts in many respects kind of human-like, that brings some of the good and some of the bad. So, but anyway, so let's jump through a few use cases. I do think also that adds a bit of context, a bit of color, maybe people can kind of tangibly understand it. One of the most common use cases is procure to pay. We're seeing it's probably the most, especially in the finance and accounting space, it's probably the one that's the head, whether you're processing invoices, whether you're extracting data from multiple documents, such as a purchase order, a receiving document, and an invoice, and comparing that information, setting up your vendors. Order to cash is another common area, whether you're using generative AI technology to read contracts or extract information from various documents, orders, contracts, price estimates, statements of work. It's a really powerful use case to extract a lot of information from those documents and now use them in a way that you could not have otherwise. In general, contract review we're seeing as a very powerful use case, whether it's revenue contracts, leasing contracts, there could be vendor contracts. And we are seeing the emergence of really interesting analytical capabilities and more complex use cases where it's being used to interpret complex either data or situations to drive and make recommendations about ways to go forward. I know, Peter, I'm going to throw you a curveball. Any use cases that you want to add to here? Because this is a really interesting space and always worthwhile kind of touching on it. Were there any ones that you wanted to add in here?
I think first, this is quite focused obviously on the finance and back office operations part of the company. So I don't know, there is a lot of use cases in the creative industries, for example, etc., or more specialized, more industry-specific cases. But if we zoom back to to the back office, which is kind of the common denominator. Maybe, I think this is a really excellent summary. Maybe one thing that I would edit is it gets really interesting if you look at details of operations in manufacturing or in logistics. You will start seeing cases like customs clearance, where you have a lot of packing lists, a lot of bills of lading, commercial invoices, and needing to process this at a very detailed line level. There is like a pretty big cost of any issue, obviously. And then in the customs process, if you look at manufacturing, then it becomes things like, for example, certificates of analysis, where you do lab analysis of stuff, etc. So still you get this processing of interesting paperwork, which right now it might be people like a room full of people, open space full of people, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, just typing over some pieces of information into some computer forms from those documents, which is obviously wasteful, very wasteful activity, but not easy to automate without something like GenAI. So cases like this, definitely.
Great, those are great examples. Thank you, Peter, for jumping in there. Can we pop to the next slide? So the question that I get a lot is, okay, we've developed this governance framework. Why do we need a new framework? We have complicated technology. Complex technology has been around for decades, right? We have lots of frameworks out there, but the reality is there are a couple of nuanced differences around generative AI. Yes, when you deploy generative AI, you should already include all those other, call it governance and controls that you put around technology, but there are a few additional considerations that you need to think about. First and foremost, one of the things that Gen AI tools tend to do, especially when you think about the platforms that many generative AI tools use, they are collecting huge volumes of data from many sources which we don't necessarily understand. They perform judgmental type tasks. More traditional technology, the technology we mostly use, it may appear to us that it's judgment, but the reality it's fully programmed. It may have lots of complexity in the program, but it's programmed. I know exactly what it's going to do every single time. And now we have a degree of judgment, right? When you read 20 different forms of invoices that you've never seen before and know the right data to extract, that's a form of judgment that you can't necessarily get your fingers on. But it also is very powerful. It's ever evolving and changing. The platforms are changing. The AI software technologies are evolving all the time, adding lots of new capabilities. But that rapid ongoing evolution is something new, right? More traditional technology, I implement it and it's remained static until I make any kind of periodic changes. There are some cases of limited transparency, whether it's data and decisions. You'll probably hear the term black box thrown around quite a bit. And then the reality is, and probably the one most spoken about, is the inconsistency or the errors that potentially can come in the outputs, the concept of hallucinations. It is a real concern. I'm not suggesting that it's not something that people should be aware of, but there's to some extent also a little overblown, but it is something that people therefore keep in the back of their minds. Well, how can I trust a piece of technology that can make mistakes? And now there are several other ones, but just when you think about these type of factors, you recognize that, hey, well, our current frameworks don't really effectively address those. And that was the reason why we created this new framework. And Rami, would you mind jumping to the next slide? So let's actually introduce the Gen AI framework. Really, it's what we try to do is, this is a complex topic. I mean, there's a million different ways you can write it up. We try to bring it down into 5 broad categories. I'm going to run through these very quickly because at the end of the day, most exciting, we want to hear from Peter and have a conversation around generative AI and the governance around it. But the 5 key components, first and foremost, strategic alignment and control environment. That's about setting the right stage for AI adoption, about having a plan, having a strategy, and having the corporate policies to manage AI and generative AI effectively. Also includes the right type of tone at the top. My hope is that most organizations recognize from the CEO down that this is both an important thing for our organization and it needs to be done responsibly. Next, you have operational and technology management. That is, the technology is live. Okay, how do you manage it on an ongoing basis? Managing change, managing access, as well as making sure that you have the right type of controls to validate the accuracy of the outputs. Data and compliance management, obviously another very big topic. A lot of data goes into these models. They use a lot of data. How do you get comfortable that your data is sustained, is maintained confidential? How do you make sure that you can control the data, as well as how do you stay on top of just the regulatory compliance? It's a rapidly evolving. There are already some laws out there. The European Union has passed some. There's some in California, and there's many on the docket. But there are already many laws that are impacted by generative AI, which are quite old, like GDPR and the like. So very, very important topic. The fourth area here, transparency and accountability, continuous improvement. We touched on this. This is a technology that's evolving. It's a technology you can't really see all the time. How do you get comfortable with the decision that it makes? How do you see, let's say, behind the black curtain? And how do you deal with a technology that is moving and changing in the background, even if your kind of process and your use isn't necessarily evolving? And certainly last but not least is the human, ethical, and social considerations. Interestingly enough, this is probably something that people don't necessarily think about often when they think of technology. We think about accuracy and access and data, but the reality is this is going to change how we operate day in and day out. It's going to impact people, and therefore we need to think about that. How do we communicate with people? How do we build their skills so that they can adapt to this new world of AI that's rapidly evolving? How do we deal with the ethical considerations? Some of these tools may be accessing data that they shouldn't. They make actually bias and ethical, call it, decisions that may be inappropriate. How do you deal with that? And certainly most importantly is also the environmental impacts. Certain AI tools can use a lot of power, which is, it's fantastic to have the capability, but how do we understand the impact we're having on our environment and our communities at large? So intended to be, it's a fairly, call it simple framework that is trying to address a big topic. We have 5 domains. Under the 5 domains, there are 13 risks, and under those are about 70 control considerations to help you think about adopting the framework. But Peter, before we jump into the kind of open panel, anything that you would add, anything that you want to mention around the governance framework before we get into our discussion?
I think it made total sense. I would just let's talk about the specific points around it. I think we will touch all 5 of those areas. I would maybe come back to this again at the very end and recap where those points connect. But overall, I think just tremendously important to think about this, but also super important not to get scared from this, right? Because still AI is a huge opportunity, and this is kind of just the must-have sort of. It is a bit of sort of like a checkbox ticking exercise. Of course, it's important to look at the material risks there, because those risks are real and you need to control for them. But ultimately, it's something you need to get through, do reasonably from first principles so that it actually addresses those risks, but not to get scared by this and not adopt AI just because you need to take care of those things. Because ultimately, depending, of course, on your use case, but very often it's not such a rocket science to take care of this.
I 100% agree. I want to repeat that point: is don't let these potential risks stop you from adopting AI. We talk about this framework a lot, not to scare people, but to make sure that you do it responsibly. But it's about you doing it responsibly, not you not doing it because of these risks. But in that case, maybe let's jump into the panel discussion. Peter, before we jump in to talk about risks and governance and all that kind of stuff, it's fun to have an industry leader like yourself. You've been in the space for a long time. Just looking at your resume, I mean, you've gone way back in this. Why are you excited about AI? What do you think about some of the values that it can bring and value that it can bring to companies?
Absolutely. So overall, I'm excited about AI because it's kind of life-changing and humanity-transforming technology in the long term. Obviously, there are people that say, okay, now a new model came out, the world will be different tomorrow. I think it's going to take quite a bit of time, and maybe some of it will take still decades to taper through, even if it's a revolutionary new technology. But still, I think in the long run, this is technology that will change kind of the trajectory of mankind, if I'm allowed to use those great words. But let's get a little more down to earth to how this affects companies, maybe companies of today as well. I guess if you look at the whole history of economics, of civilization, is doing more with less, right? You kind of, from the invention of agriculture all the way to now, this is all about doing more with less, so that you spend less resources, less people, and less people's time on producing more and more value. And AI is a huge step exactly in this direction for companies. So, and it's in 2 ways. First, suddenly you might need a lot less people to do some things if you can largely automate them. And the second thing, you can give your people autopilots of all kinds to make them more efficient, to move faster, and just to get things done faster. And I think there is a huge amount of value in both of those things. kind of leads to interesting discussions in the long run. Okay, I mostly automated my accounting department. Maybe it's now less than 1 FTE even. Do I need to keep at least 1 accountant there, or do I create some maybe shared and mixed roles? So there is a continuum between those two alternatives. One is automating some things rather than being done with people, and the other introducing those copilots. But overall, I think it's a story of doing a lot more with a lot less with AI. Some of it will still take time, but some of it you can implement right today, and it will bring great value.
Yeah, no, that's exciting. Great. Well, thank you for that, Peter. So maybe we should move on to the next.
Of course. Maybe actually let me ask you about this, because I'm kind of excited about AI, but also thinking a lot about AI strategy that companies adopt, and I would be curious, because you are consulting with a lot of companies and you talk to a lot of them about AI strategy, and I'd be curious, how do companies navigate? How do they define their AI strategy? How much do you even see companies having any kind of AI strategies? And how can companies go about creating one?
It's a good question. I think what we're seeing is, I think, and what's getting a bit in the way of developing strategy is there's a clear lack of understanding around the technology. Not everybody. I mean, some people have invested a lot of time, but certainly as you get into various business functions, whether it's finance and accounting, whether it's business operations, sales operations, I think there's an excitement about AI. But I think people's exposure tends to be, well, I've played around with ChatGPT and it was kind of cool, but what can it really do for me? So I do think that is actually getting in a little bit in the way. I do think what I've seen is probably not as comprehensive a strategy approach in some respects. So we have some people that are like, wow, AI, it's so exciting, everybody's doing it. The leader walks over to the CFO, walks over to the head of accounting and says, what are we doing around AI? Which is great. I mean, I like the fact that they're adopting, but in reality is not a strategy as well. I think the more robust organizations, the more mature organizations around this, and it doesn't have to be big companies per se, but just mature around planning, is what they start with, and what you should always start with is, what are our business goals? What are our business goals? What are we trying to achieve as an organization? From that, you ask yourself, how can technology and automation, including AI, help me effectively solve those? Is my goal to drive up profitability so I can use the funds to invest somewhere else? Is my goal throughput so that I can sell? Is my goal growth? Am I entering new markets? There are many different reasons to adopt AI in the context of a broader corporate strategy, but we find that those are typically the best. Start at the goals, then determine, okay, how can automation help? And then find a good spot for where generative AI can involve. Now, that I'm going to say that at the same time, I also encourage people, even if it doesn't necessarily perfectly tie into your corporate strategy immediately or obviously, do some basic adoption of AI. The reason being is because, as I mentioned, one of the biggest problems to getting AI in the organization is a lack of understanding. So you need to adopt it in a small way so you can understand it. And what it will do is open your mind and your eyes to all these other use cases. And you'll probably then find many more powerful use cases for your corporate strategy.
I think that's like a great point. And one thing I would be afraid of is, okay, people think, okay, first I need to think of some AI strategy, and then I can start trying AI, and suddenly it's 3 months later and you didn't move at all. I think my opinion is, if you are in a leadership position in a company, especially if it's on the technology side, but I think it applies to all positions, you should be trying ChatGPT at least a little, like each week pick something. It doesn't even have to be like business related. Maybe even actually it's not wise to use it without this risk governance for anything business related. But just in your personal life, or you are curious about something, try this out, see where it shines, see also its limitations, so that you get a good sense of it. But I think all company leaders should have practical experience with GenAI, with those publicly available tools, just at least from their personal life, so that they get a bit of appreciation of what's possible, right?
I totally agree. I mean, you just need to play with it to learn it, and then you'll see so many use cases. So, Peter, I'd like to jump maybe to hallucinations. Would you mind? Because I think that's a topic that everybody is kind of care, right? It's one of the most common areas, right? How can I trust a technology if it can make mistakes, right? I imagine you must get this question a lot from clients and from even folks, maybe even internally within the organization. It's certainly very relevant for finance and accounting teams. Maybe can you share some of the ways that Rossum and you guys have, what you've done with the product, or how do you approach getting accuracy as an outcome, so that frankly, if I buy the technology, if I use an AI technology, I'm not having to double check and triple check everything in case I've made a mistake. Would you mind giving some thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I think here the key is to think about, okay, what are the strengths and weaknesses of those amazing tools? And those tools, they aren't like a panacea, they aren't like a magic bullet, right? But I think it's not so bad to think in an analogy to what people of those characteristics do. And the general GenAI tools, they are actually generalists. They can do pretty much anything. And like in your company, you probably also get people like this, people that can do pretty much anything. They have a wide spectrum of things they can do, but it often comes also with some downsides in terms of maybe less attention to detail, etc. And this is an analogy that holds a little also for those GenAI tools. They can do pretty much anything, but if you need them to do the same thing over and over again, and very precisely, very methodically, then that's something that they might not excel in so much, and that's when you start getting things like hallucinations. First, they have trouble flagging where they aren't sure. They rather make something up. And second, if they need to go, for example, look at the document, go line by line, they can get lost a little. They have their attention kind of all over the document, etc. And then those very precise tasks might be troublesome. So what you actually want for good adoption, for specific tasks where you don't need this generalist knowledge, you actually need the agent, the robot, the tool to do something very specific. You want a specialized version of it. And let's take as an example what we did here at Rossum, for example, which is we were thinking, okay, we need a GenAI-based technology that can extract information from documents. So we made a specialized version of it. And we are thinking, okay, what are the two issues? One is it needs to confidently flag when it isn't sure, or if the information actually isn't there, it doesn't make it up. And second, it needs to be specialized for this thing. So one aspect of this is having specific training data so that you maximize performance on some specialized task, but you also want the whole system to be adapted to it. So for example, what we did is we have a specialized technology which we call the discriminative decoder. And I don't want to get very technical here, but essentially what it does is it doesn't write from scratch the information from those financial documents. We gave the GenAI just a highlighter which flags, okay, in this document, the piece of information is here. And then there is a different component which is like letter by letter transcribes it. This way, you cannot really have hallucinations and the system making up information from scratch, because it just operates on top of identifying information that's already there. So you want things like this. You want things like this both on the on all sorts of use cases. So we did something similar actually when we recently launched a new way to customize the system to reflect your business rules, to reflect your SOPs, your standard operating practices. So you have a set of rules and you want to codify them. But if you just use GenAI technology naively, it's going to be a bit unreliable, because sometimes it just gets confused. It can be even attacked by some specially crafted documents sent by someone designed to confuse it. So you want to be clever about it. For example, you want to just apply during the setup. So you tell the system what you need to do. For example, apply this discount in this specific information, but it creates a fixed program code which is not GenAI based anymore, and you do that you do that at execution time, so you don't have the hallucination problem, you don't have the attacks at all. So you wanna for those things you wanna pick tools which thought about those risks and which address them in a design way, not just by training on more data. Of course, that's beneficial, but the whole tool is designed so that this problem cannot even occur. And then it takes care of the risk, but it also gets you much better performance, much better efficiency from using that kind of tool.
That's a great insight. And What I want to point out is maybe people to pay attention. I think there were a couple of just things that Peter was talking about, which was you select tools. These are kind of great questions to ask. It's not just can the thing read the documents. What you as a software provider have you done to improve the accuracy? Now, Peter, if I flip it to the other side, because the reality is, yes, the technology can improve the accuracy and the quality, but there's still this concept of the human in the loop. I mean, that isn't important. You hear it over and over again. What are a few things that people and companies should think about as they kind of, hey, I'm going to deploy a product. What should my human in the loop look like? Do I need to double check and triple check everything? Can you give some suggestion of what you've seen as kind of good human in the loop approaches?
So I think you need to think about foremostly, how do you roll out the solution so that you start getting value quickly, but it works in your specific environment? That's a bit of a company specific thing. If it's a B2C product, something like ChatGPT, you just have a journalist, you can chat with it about whatever, etc., and it's just a good conversation partner. If it's something that operates within your company, each company is set up differently, has a bit different internal processes, a different set of IT systems, things like this. And you need to think about, okay, how do I onboard this system just as I onboard a new engineer or a new employee or a new data clerk, etc., right? One, the traditional IT consulting approach is, okay, we set up an 18-month process, 18-month project, where we just configure the system, go through everything, set up all the connections, etc., so that then we turn it on and it works perfectly from day one. This does not work out as well in the practice, right? You find out, okay, it's 24 months in, finally we start rolling out the first department and there is so many issues that we still need to fix, etc. But this is not the approach that you need to necessarily follow in this GenAI world. That's part of why it's so revolutionary. It's not just about the automation of the process, but also the way you roll it out. And I talk about this here because the human in the loop is a key part of rolling it out. Because if you onboard a new employee, often what happens, you give them a sort of an onboarding buddy, right? And their first day at work, they just work together with someone, they look over their shoulder, etc. And that's exactly what you want to do with many of those GenAI tools, especially when you want to automate some process, but the process is very customized for you. The human in the loop is there that, okay, you turn on the AI starts doing its thing after some basic initial configuration, but it might not always, for example, pick the right field from some document, etc. So you want the human there to double check, okay, is this fine? Is this not fine, etc. And you first you give the feedback to the AI, what's correct, what's not correct. And that means it can better understand when to ask for feedback next time and when can it just confidently automate. And second, you just give it feedback, okay, what the right answer is, and it can learn from this feedback. You want tools that are really advanced in this, that can learn in real time, so that this learning group is really quick, so that your employees don't get frustrated by just correcting the information again and again every time, right? And that is a way to start getting value from day one. Because first you should get tools with great user interface that actually are just better than your legacy IT tools from day one. But second, you start getting some degree of automation from the very first day, and this degree of automation just goes up gradually. So you want something like this. But for this, you need this initial human in the loop. And I think in many cases, the real world is so rich that you still want some human in the loop, even in the long term. You keep changing your suppliers, your business partners, you keep tweaking your processes, releasing new products, whatever your company does, right? Your business context keeps changing. And this human in the loop element helps you without extra IT costs, without additional IT projects. Very often just cover for this, just keep giving it feedback so that the tool keeps adapting even on the long term.
Yeah, that gets a really good point. I also like the kind of, it's almost like a graduating, where you do more at the beginning, and over time, as the tool gets better, you can probably reduce it over time. I think people from my experience, like they're looking for a simple, hey, I do exactly this. And that's really not the answer. The circumstances change. The tool will get better over time. It'll learn better after you'll get more comfortable over time. Evolve your human in the loop. Just be thoughtful about it. So it's really, thank you. I appreciate that. So that's super helpful.
Exactly. And maybe I would be curious. Do you actually, if we talk about those like human in the loops, the automation overall, can we zoom this out a little to some specific use cases? And maybe here I would be curious about your opinion. If we have, I believe we have many CFOs, many finance professionals, many VPs and directors from those departments on this call, on this webinar right now. What would be your recommendation about use cases to start with? Something where those new automation projects have a fairly high chance of success, some positive ROI, getting early so that they can get comfortable with this whole GenAI prospect.
Yeah, it's a really good question there. And what I find is, I think people are oftentimes looking, I think you actually just mentioned this at the beginning of it. It's like people are looking for this magic bullet, this I'm waiting for AI that I can just plug it in and it's going to do everything for me. And that's really it. I don't know when, maybe that'll be a reality eventually. That's not a reality today. So I do think that, as once again, going back to really what are you trying to solve for? But what we're seeing right now, where the most powerful use cases are around the processes where there is, I guess, a lot of human engagement with documentation. It is one of the most powerful uses of generative AI. It's very good at interpreting, call it human language and text in documents, whether it's an invoice, whether it's a contract. It does a really good job of that. It's able to interact with that. It's already a recurring, regular problem. Organizations have an enormous amount of paperwork. I mean, now it's in, I guess, mostly PDF form or Word form, but we deal with emails and invoices, bills of lading, employee contracts, sales contracts, NDAs. I mean, there's so many documents, financial reports. I mean, we have tons and tons of documents. So what I'm encouraging people to do is, one, that's a use case that's really easy to understand. It's very easy to understand the benefit. Hey, I have a lot of paper that I'm dealing with. I have a human that has to spend all this time reading and extracting that info. In many cases, that extraction is actually just going up into here, meaning a human reads it, then takes an action, and it never actually converts into a structured format, which, by the way, also means that when you want to get that information again later on, you get to do it all over again. So it's a very clear, very powerful use case. The technology is very good in the space. It's also one that, kind of eliminates a little of that black box concern, because I have a document, I have a process, I have an outcome, and it's very easy to go from the outcome back to the original document to get comfort and confidence around it. So to me, that's where I'm encouraging people to start. Specifically, procure to pay, if you have a lot of volume, there is an area. You touched on the whole inventory manufacturing is another really big area, especially if you're like maybe an importer or you're shipping lots of products around, you're dealing with lots of third parties, 3PLs and the like. Another big area that we see is on the revenue side of the house, right? That whole sales cycle. Invariably, you're dealing with a customer and there's a lot of exchange of documentation. There's typically, you may have your internal data, such as quotes and orders, which may be systematic, but there's typically a contract that is not systematic. There's typically a purchase order coming from the customer. There could be a whole series of emails going on. Those are areas we see are really valuable. In some respects, they are low-hanging fruit because they're very obvious use cases to leverage AI. And we'll see from there, as we then migrate into more the analytical and the more complex ones. But I'd really encourage, this is a good use case. It's nice and simple. It's easy to understand. It's easy to audit. It's easy to manage. Proven tools. It's a really a good place to start. I don't know, Peter, if you have any thoughts on that.
I really like your emphasis on kind of just like easy to understand use cases. I think that just makes your first GenAI project so much easier. I don't know if you think of, okay, maybe my master data database is low quality and I want to clean it up. Okay, then you get all sorts of questions. Okay, like to what degree, what's currently in it, etc. It's kind of example of something that's maybe a little poorly phrased. But if you think about, okay, I have this task, I have a clear input document, maybe it's a sales order or something, and I need a clear output, I don't know, an entry in SAP order object in SAP posted, etc., right? Then it's something much easier to think about, okay, what are some KPIs, what are some quantitative indicators, how it's going, what exactly is the ROI, the value is there, right? Less people time spent on it. So I think this ease of description is really powerful to make those projects successful, and even to go to market and shop for something, because suddenly you have a clear story you can articulate in your first email, your RFP, etc.
Yeah, no, it's what I hear often from folks is I want AI to look at all my data and tell me everything I should do and give me all these metrics and analytics. And not to say that I don't think that's going to happen, and frankly, it might not be that far out. But the biggest problem with those type of projects isn't the technology that's the problem. Oftentimes, companies have bad data. They don't have good process. So you want a piece of AI sitting on top of a technology, on top of all this information, and you don't even know if it's right or wrong. Not only that, you are then really heavily relying on a very big black box. It's going to look at a whole bunch of stuff and give you an answer. I think people think they want that. I think when they really dig into it and understand, well, you're going to rely on this black box that's looking at a lot of data, which you're not really sure is accurate to tell you what to do. I think we'll probably, so that's why focus on some of the transactional, some of the easier stuff, and let's progress. This is a technology we need to mature into. So, yeah, sorry, go first.
Maybe to follow up on those black boxes and so on, maybe I would think about how can we move again to the topic of AI governance.
Yes.
And we talked a little about the hallucinations, for example, and about those related risks. But what I would be curious is what you have seen regarding AI policies in your clients, because that's your first tool in your toolkit, I guess, to control those risks, to even articulate the risks you see. So what I would be curious is, what should be the considerations to include in an AI policy, how to write an AI policy, how to reflect the GenAI risks in this policy?
Yeah, it's a great question. The good news is, at least from my experience, a lot of companies have already developed a policy, which is good. I think we thought it was probably just off the ChatGPT and everybody was jumping on it. Everybody was freaking out. We need to write a policy. So from most of the companies, at least the ones that I'm interacting, we are seeing they have a policy. That being said, I will say the policies are a little simplistic, right? It was a matter of, hey, let's quickly do it. I have a feeling that many even went to ChatGPT and said, hey, write me an AI policy around generative AI, and then they kind of ran with that. Some of the key things to talk about in there. One, it's really important to talk about roles and responsibilities, and that's frankly, I think it's something that we don't actually see as much. They talk about how we operate, but who are the players here? There are lots of players. Who is responsible for governance? Who is responsible for choosing technologies, right? Who are the decision makers around the direction that we're going? Who is ultimately going to evaluate individual technology? I mean, there's a lot of roles and responsibility, legal and compliance associated with it. There's a lot of roles and responsibilities that need to be defined, and frankly, I find
the one is responsible, it doesn't happen, right?
Correct, exactly. So they write a policy, they throw it out there, but nobody's actually owning it. So roles and responsibilities are super important. How you go about evaluating technology, especially generative AI technology. What are the requirements? Who should be involved? There are newer complexities with generative AI. It's not just your normal IT selection. Typically, when we're doing a system selection, hey, it's the business owner who makes the decision on, does this technology fit my needs and do I have the budget? And then IT does its kind of general vetting. But in this case, you might need legal involved to make sure that you're looking at how is that tool using AI and what contractual relationships they have with maybe AI models that they're leveraging or other third parties involved. So so you really need to reevaluate that and really thoughtfully do so. You need to consider new things such as bias and ethical considerations, such as, okay, what is our position about how we treat our people as we adopt this AI? Is it okay for us to just, hey, you know what, people will figure it out? Or is as a policy in our organization, we are about developing and encouraging and training our people? These are just a few of the items that we see that I think people are not necessarily thinking about as part of their policy. We also like that we see actually a lot of companies do that, but included in your policy, hey, the fact that we actually will have a company-wide committee that will be evaluating AI and managing AI holistically, because what we are also seeing is, and this is a great example, product like Rossum are not a finance and accounting tool. They're a broad organizational product. If you don't have a committee that's looking at AI broadly, what will end up happening is finance might buy Rossum, And then marketing might go buy a tool that does maybe kind of similar capabilities for something else, and then sales will buy their own one, and you end up with this proliferation of technology. So to me, I think that having that committee that's not necessarily oversight, but at least transparency and communication, where you can actually talk about the varying risks and the varying impacts and the varying tools and plans, so that you actually adopt AI in a kind of more organizational, aligned way, rather than necessarily everybody just doing whatever they want. So
makes sense.
Yeah. Peter, can I ask you a question about, kind of a bit of the training and education side? There are several risks around generative AI. Some companies are rolling out trainings and the like. Are there maybe one or two areas where you think organizations don't understand the technology well enough, that they may be either neglecting or maybe not focusing enough? What might be some of those risks that, hey, as I'm training my people, I need to make sure I'm educating them on these few items?
I think there is quite a few things. I think general awareness is super important. Again, encourage your people just to get supported by GenAI wherever appropriate. I've seen companies that just give people personal benefit of just using ChatGPT subscription as part of their benefit package for personal purposes, etc. Might make some sense just to build the awareness, and also just to give people a nice benefit. It might be a nice retention tool as well. There is quite a few courses about AI in general, and it's not like math equations, etc. It's more about how does machine learning work in general. It needs to be trained on something, then it has maybe some inherent biases. What can you expect it to do well? What can you expect it to do worse? And I think people at all ages can take those courses. They are pretty quick forms of webinars or interactive web applications, etc. And I think I started with this because I think it's actually the most impactful thing, because you can do specific training about strengths and weaknesses of prompting large language models, whatever, but this is changing every year now. It's not gonna last, right? You need to make sure that people understand those principles, and then they will be flexible. And in this time, what you need most is people who are adaptive, who are flexible, who are able to learn fast, and that's the most important thing. The other thing that I would say is really know their tools. So maybe you are using some advanced GenAI-based tool, maybe something like Rossum to process your documents. Maybe your software engineers are using some AI-enabled integrated development interfaces, etc. And very often, you just see the basic thing there, the basic feature, the thing that you discovered during your first use, and you never go in depth. But the tool is actually super powerful and can save you so much more time if you just get some basic training. And I am surprised how often people just skip this step and then just say, okay, I managed to do my thing somehow, so I'll just keep doing it like this and never really go deeper, even if they could be 2 times more effective, or maybe just use the tool so that the system adapts better. Right? They might not even notice that they are doing something suboptimal, but if they did it better, the automation rate in a week could be much higher if they gave better feedback to the AI, for example.
That's great. I know we're getting too close to time, so maybe, Peter, maybe we can wrap up, and maybe Rami, go to the next slide, the governance framework again. Is maybe what are a couple of takeaways? So, hey, we've spoken about a lot of things on AI, some of the governance framework. What are some of a couple of key takeaways that you would, recommend or highlight for our viewers?
Absolutely. So for me, maybe let me pick one thing for each of those 4 main or 4 individual pillars. For ops and tech management, we talked a little about the rollout effort, and I would really recommend you to deep dive into how that works with your GenAI tools, and really demand hypercare, proven track record in onboarding, not just nice technology, but really onboarding into practice. In terms of data and compliance management, I would prefer kind of going from first principles. What are the actual risks, and if the tool is well applicable to your use case. In terms of continuous improvement, I think the important thing is to ask your vendors about their approach, to continuous improvement and to really include this as one of the key evaluation criteria. Again, goes back to the human in the loop, and really demands something where you don't need an IT project to set things up completely, but where as much of this is just done by the AI and continuously adapts by the AI. And then we didn't really talk much about ethical considerations. I think that's like a huge topic. We could have spent half of the webinar or the whole webinar just on that. And I think in the finance departments, it's not so strong as in one of your maybe product departments, etc. But it's important to just like have properly phrased internal objectives and just approach your risk from in terms of also your company's culture and mission, and really tailor it to your use case, the role your company plays. If you are a healthcare company, you might have a bit something different than if you are just manufacturing beverages or something like that. So that would be my perspective, but I'll be super curious about your, Jason. What would be your highlights, your key takeaways be?
I'm going to repeat one of the ones that we already spoke about, which is governance is important for generative AI. The product, the technology has some unique risks, and you need to be aware and you need to educate yourself. But don't let the risks get in the way of adoption. The reality is we're seeing, I think there were some surveys done earlier this year where 100% of CFOs are planning to adopt AI in the coming years. Don't be the one that's left behind. We're already seeing the competitive landscape change. With product companies that are adopting AI, running ahead or creating features and functions that kind of companies that are more established are not able to do. So you use the governance framework. I love the concept, first principles. What are the risks? Implement controls, but that is as part of should be a strong adoption process. So that's the one thing. The second thing, which I think sometimes maybe just worthwhile emphasizing, is just I think companies need to, especially with gender, revisit how they manage third parties. I think that's one of the things that has really come to mind and I'm not talking necessarily just about software providers, and although that is a big component of third parties, like making sure that the software is secure and stuff, but other third parties, your consultants, your auditors, your legal third parties, your contractors that you're using, many of these third parties that you engage and many organizations engage on a day in and day out basis are adopting AI themselves, and they may be invisible to you. They may be taking information from your organization and putting it in their software technologies, and you may be unaware of it. So I do think that one of the areas where I encourage people, yes, there's a lot of broader stuff, but that was one of the areas where I feel like it's one where there's both low-hanging fruit and opportunities to really address some hidden risks by kind of revisiting your third-party vendor management. So that's some of the stuff that I have. I know that we have a few minutes left. Do we want to jump to questions?
Thank you, Jason and Peter, for a very insightful discussion. I guess the key message for today is really just don't be scared, get to work. These safeguard rails are put in place for you to really reap the benefits of Gen AI. But before we actually jump into the Q&A session, I want to highlight back to our survey results and kind of get a bit of a reflection onto some of the interesting points. One for me particularly is the 7% saying, no, we haven't started adopting Gen AI tech in any specific, we don't have any specific plans. Just out of curiosity, maybe Jason, you can start. Just what can you make out of this very unscientific survey?
We're going to make major decisions around this right now.
Yeah.
What's interesting is that the thing that's jumping out at me is that the blue one, that 21% is slowly, which I guess we somewhat expect. It is growing. In some respects, I'm sometimes surprised that it hasn't grown more quickly. But it is slowly growing. I also think that we are seeing so when you look at the first two, the 21 and the 43, more and more people are using AI fairly regularly, which is great. My hope is that we see the actual true adoption of AI technologies accelerate a little bit more. There's so much opportunity here. ChatGPT is a good way to kind of dip your toe in the water, but move ahead from that, get some more sophisticated use cases.
Tremendous. All right, now to make our way to the Q&A session. But before, if anyone who's watching this would like to download the Gen AI Governance Framework directly, they can scan the QR code on the screen and they can get a free PDF copy. Or they'd like to have a one-on-one chat with either Jason or a team member from our side at Rossum, they can do so by scanning the QR code. We do have a question for Peter, specifically on the subject of bias. So bias is a common concern with AI. How can organizations ensure that their document processing AI models aren't intentionally biased, especially when working with varied document types and languages?
I think ask your AI vendor is kind of the first step, and then really your AI vendor should have a good answer to this question. I think again, let's going from first principles. Let's think about where is the bias coming from, and what are the risks from the bias, because the risk isn't the bias itself. The risk might be I'm making biased decision that discriminates someone, for example, right? That's actually the end risk you want to control, right? Of course, if we talk about finance and processing financial documents, the risk from bias is mainly, okay, I'm seeing some very confusing document that might look differently than similar documents, there it's about the robustness of the machine learning algorithms, and it's really just about the quality of your technology. I don't think you can do that much yourself as an end organization, rather than just like ask your vendor about it. But also bias sometimes might be a good thing in the sense if you get the same document every time. If the tool is able to intelligently bias towards the document, it will just have higher accuracy and learn faster. So really talk to your vendor about this, hear their story, and think about, okay, what are the actual risks I'm concerned about? Is it that sometimes I get an exceptional document that looks similar to other documents? Then ask your vendor that. They should have a good answer to that.
Wonderful. We do have a question for Jason, particularly. I'm assuming it's for Jason. So have you seen many companies already getting the GenAI governance framework in place? And what are your thoughts around that? Like from your experience at Connor Group?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think it's actually relatively slow. I think we're seeing the adoption of technology vastly outpace, and sorry, the gardener would arrive today when I'm having this call.
No problem.
The adoption of technology is vastly outpacing the governance. So I think people are putting some things in place. So they mentioned they're putting policies, and they might have a community of folks working together. But the reality is, I think actually being thoughtful and approaching governance holistically using a governance framework, I think it's very few. And that's what worries me, because I think people are kind of cherry picking what they think of, and you should approach it holistically. It doesn't actually mean you have to do everything in the governance framework. The framework is intended to say, hey, here is the whole population of things for you to think about. Now use the risk basis to determine which ones you should focus on that are most relevant to your organization. But if you, without a framework, you're likely to cherry pick what's easy or what you think of, and it's kind of that unknown unknowns that you miss and find yourself in trouble. But my expectations, we'll see many, many more adopt governance as we get into 25 and 26.
An absolutely essential read for anyone interested or actively investing in AI technology within their organization. I want to take a moment now to thank our speakers today, Jason Pikoos, managing partner at Connor Group, and our co-founder and CTO, Petr Baudis, for sharing their insights, their anecdotes, and their overall perspective on how we should proceed as an industry on that front. I want to thank you all for attending and asking these questions and participating in our poll. We always learn so much from these discussions. Again, please watch this space for all our updates, for such insightful discussions. Team Rossum is actively involved in events and webinars and live demos, so stay tuned to our social media, to our newsletter, and all our channels. Again, thanks to the team at Connor Group and our Team Rossum, who is actively involved in putting this discussion together. And now I'm going to wrap things up for everyone here. Once again, thank you, Jason. Thank you, Peter. And with this, we can come to a culmination of our discussion.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Perfect. Thank you.